Hey, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who are seated in the back, if you could join us up a little closer, that would be greatly appreciated.
Unless you'd like to be called on for questions.
Yes, unless we'll ask you the questions. So just come on up a little closer, please. And while they're coming, my name is Stephanie Easter. I currently serve as the Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Cobham Advanced Electronic Solutions. And it's a pleasure to be here today to moderate a panel on emerging leaders. As you're getting seated, I would like to briefly introduce our panel members. I will encourage you to take their names down and to read their full bios online or through LinkedIn because we have a very impressive panel with us here today. Right. So first we will start with Admiral Brett Midas. Brett Midas is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and a Naval Flight Officer, and he currently serves as the Director, Navy Culture and Force Resilience Office, N17. His flying tours include service as a Fleet Replacement Squadron instructor at VP-30, Commanding Officer VP-40, and Commander, Patrol, and Reconnaissance Wing 10. His staff tours include Russia and Baltic desk officers on the Joint Staff and in the front offices of Commander Carrier Group 7, OPNAV N98, OPNAV N9I, and in the office of the Vice Chief of Naval Operations. He was the Navy's first Strategic Integration Group Director and a plank owner of the Maritime Patrol and Reconnaissance Community's first Weapons and Tactics Instructors class. Please help me in welcoming Admiral Midas. Next to him, we have Ms. Carrie Wilkerson. Ms. Carrie Wilkerson is a 28-year shipbuilder and currently serves as the president of Huntington Ingalls Shipbuilding in Pascagoula, Mississippi. She started her career in the shipyard as a naval architect and moved up through various positions in engineering, operations, and program management. She has had a front row seat to the extraordinary mission and purpose of the people at Ingalls, and it was on the waterfront that she generated her profound respect for the men and women that build ships in support of national security. Please join me in welcoming Carrie Wilkerson. Then we have Rear Admiral Amy Baron-Schmidt. Amy Baron-Schmidt is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, is a nuclear power school graduate and a naval aviator, and currently serves as the Deputy Commander, U.S. 7th Fleet. Her sea tours include, but are not limited to, the Wolfpack of Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron Light, HSLs 45, the Warlords of HSL 51, and Executive Officer USS Abraham Lincoln, or CVN 72. She also commanded the USS San Diego, LPD 22, and the USS Abraham Lincoln. Ashore, her tours included Executive Assistant and Action Officer to the J6 and Senior Military Advisor to the Secretary of State's Office of Global Women's Issues. Please join me in welcoming Admiral Baron-Schmidt. And last but not least, we have Mr. Del Sisson.
Maybe least.
Mr. Del Sisson joined the ranks of Senior Executive Service in 2018 and currently serves as the Technical Director for Naval Surface Warfare Center Dahlgren Division. Prior to his appointment to the SES, he led at every level in the Navy Surface Warfare Center Dahlgren organization, to include Deputy Technical Director and Department Head. He also completed a one-year executive detail as Director of Systems Engineering in the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for RDT&E. Prior to joining Dahlgren, he spent 5 years in industry as both a manufacturing engineer and a product designer. Please join me in welcoming Del Sisson. So please, again, I encourage you to read their full bios. I just took out a couple of snippets that I thought were highlights and things that you should consider as you listen to the people here before you today. As you heard, we have a great panel, a lot of experience leading at a lot of different levels. And the purpose of this panel is to talk about emerging leaders in today's environment. The world is changing, okay? Everything around us has changed in ways and the pace that we've never experienced before. right? Technology, threats, the way we interact with each other. And studies have shown that leadership is impacted by that. And one of the biggest challenges we have, whether you're a leader today or whether you aspire to be a leader in the future, is how do you navigate and how do you adjust your leadership style to work within this changing environment? So with that as a prelude, I would like to ask, how do you perceive the evolving role of leaders in this dynamic and fast-paced environment? We'll start with you, Admiral Mike.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. I think that one of the things that's most important for leaders today, I heard this recently, so it's not my own idea, is that in the past, leadership was a little bit different. In the present, what I would offer is that leaders need to have a very good understanding of what makes humans tick. That kind of baseline psychology 101. How do you build connected and inclusive teams? How do you show somebody that they value at a very, that they matter at a really high level? I think in the past, leaders could focus on the outcomes and let the people stuff just kind of take care of itself. But today, leaders have to focus on people, building them individually, the strength and resilience of their mind, body, spirit, and this whole element of being invested in your folks. Last week, I was I was talking with somebody in Seattle, and there was a company that had been hired by Chipotle. And Chipotle said, I have 2 stores. They're in about the same spot. One vastly outperforms the other. Why? And this company said, well, it's food quality. Like, well, that makes sense. And then they're saying, well, what's the number one driver for food quality? Because it's the same chain, it's the same source, right? And the number one driver for that was whether their leaders cared about them. So even at a Chipotle, it was all about understanding the human dynamic and the leaders that could help their workforce understand that they believed and care about them, produce better food and better revenue for Chipotle. So thanks.
Thank you. Carrie.
Sure, maybe to continue that thread. So as we think about how we value our people, the whole idea of being a leader is to be able to encourage and enable the people on your team and on their teams to bring their best ideas forward on any given problem set. And people feeling comfortable and able to do that, I think, is really important. There's an agility associated with responding to inputs from a tremendously diverse, I'll say, set of perspectives. And so as you assimilate those things, I think the ability to react to those, to incorporate those for the best possible outcome, but at the same time, I think as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to maintain some sense of directional stability. Right, there's a lot of distractions, and there are a lot of great ideas. Not all will bring the best result given any specific problem. So I think the ability to balance that, where you're encouraging people, making people feel comfortable to bring their best ideas, incorporating the ones that make sense, making sure the people that maybe their ideas weren't brought forward for the final solution, but they still feel like you valued their input and you have some sense of that directional stability, so you keep moving the team generally forward.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a common theme, taking care of your people. Admiral?
Sure. So Brett stole half the answer, because it is true. When I think about watching good leaders today versus maybe good leaders when I was that younger person being led, I think most of the good leaders I've watched communicate much more frequently. They talk a lot more about the mission. They build that connective tissue between what the really important work that everyone's doing every day, whether it's on the deck plates or in the shipyard, and what the mission is when you get out there operating. Time. I talk about, many leaders talk about their number one resource is their people, and that is true. I think for a lot of our junior people, their number one resource is their time, and so being respectful of their time. Doesn't mean you're always getting out early, doesn't mean you're getting extra days off, but when you have the chance, which kind of leads into the third part, which is balance, how you try to find a little bit of balance. And we're probably not the people to be asking that question to, because we probably don't do it well enough. But, try to work smarter, not harder. Try to give them time off when you can. And then, if there was one thing that would drive me nuts is when the petty officer, the E6 shows up at 1300 and says, okay, here's our list of everything that needs to get done today. And so then you're working a much longer day. If you did that at 8 a.m., we all would have been done by the time that 1300 list came out. So yeah, communication, try to get a little bit of balance, and then just be respectful of someone's time.
All right, thank you.
Well, this is the risk of going fourth. Certainly communication, mission, and caring about your folks has to roll into a concerted leadership strategy, I think. And one of the things that I find most challenging today, I have a civilian workforce of about 5,000, another 4,500 or so contractors, so about 10,000 folks, and trying to get to the same message to the entirety of your team when there are so many communication mediums available to you today is I think navigating that successfully is key. And so then driving consistency in that message, independent of the format, is extremely valuable for two things. One is transparency. I find that our workforce today wants to be much more closely coupled to the actual mission that's taking place. Like, don't sugarcoat it. And so, conducting, classified level briefs with our workforce in its entirety, you say, here's why we're doing what we're doing. Because it's also harder to get to ground truth today with all of those options for different news available and different sources. So I think that continuity that we can bring to the table, to the environment today, is so important. And then that transparency allows you to rally the workforce to the mission.
Okay, thank you. So I think you guys have covered a lot of ground here, and I think some of it sets us up for the next round of questions, right? We talked about directional stability, we talked about communication, we're talking about the workforce being transparent and wanting to connect. A good part of our workforce nowadays is a lot younger than maybe when some of us were coming up. And now it's a digital age, right? And a lot of the people that we work with and that work for us are constantly connected, right? Everything now is played out on social media a lot of times. So I would like to ask the question, in what ways has the digital age influenced the expectation placed on leaders? And how have you adapted to that? We'll start with you, Amy, or Admiral.
Sure, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. I'm not going to actually talk about social media because, we piloted a program called Ready Relevant Learning, and I wasn't skeptical of the program. Essentially, it was kind of a live virtual construct, but I wasn't sure how the sailors were going to adapt to it. And what I quickly realized is that I have become one of them. And they grew up in this world where so much of how they interacted with the world was digital, that they took to it. It was actually not initially the best user interface, but they took to it like you wouldn't believe. And so as I think a lot about warfighting and what we do every day, the ability to bring some of that technology and that digital media into our warfighting, our schools, our training. Not only are we're getting better at it, but the younger sailors are taken to it, and therefore they're spending more time learning their craft. They're getting better at their ratings. They're advancing. They're getting better at warfighting. And so everything from our live virtual construct training to a much more simple digital screen where they can get, much better at their job at a much faster pace has been incredible to watch. And so we're getting there. We've got to do more of it. And it is the way that they have grown up learning and incorporating it on an everyday basis.
Okay, so I'll follow up on that quickly. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that our workforce today is very digitally inclined. Does that affect your ability to keep them engaged as a leader? Or have you had to adjust in any way around that? Or does it make your job as a leader easier when you have the tools like the training you were just talking about?
I will answer that in a very weird way. I went on deployment in 2022, and the first part of deployment, we had the normal ship system, so not a lot of bandwidth, not a lot of connectivity, nobody was on their cell phones. And it was great because people would talk at meals, they'd play cards. Now, about halfway through deployment, we were lucky enough to be able to get good connectivity so that everyone, an MWR network, everyone could be connected on their cell phones. I never really considered not turning it on. We were going to turn it on. However, I did notice going down to dinner that night that everybody was like this and nobody was interacting anymore. So I think both are really important. And so I think there's absolutely a time and a place where learning your job can be exponentially improved by digital learning. But then they also want to get out and do the job that we hired them for. And that is oftentimes absent all of that. And so I think you've got a little bit of both.
Okay, thank you. So Carrie, having grown up in industry for the most part, have you seen a different perspective on that, or what are your thoughts about the impact of the digital age?
So I think to Amy's point, using them for the tools that they are, they can certainly create the distraction. You alluded to social media, and I think that was great that you went in a different direction. Whether it's social media, whether it's the fact that we have in our organization we have a hard time moving our lips without PowerPoint slides behind us, right? So that's the crutch we all have. I think the tools, the capabilities that they provide allow us to focus what we do. But if we rely on them solely to figure out what it is we're supposed to be doing, I think we're misguided, right? And so, in the shipyard, obviously, production environment, a cell phone, if you tell somebody that's coming through the gates that they can't have their cell phone on the ship, that's a big problem for a lot of folks coming in. It's not because we're monsters, it's because it's a safety concern, and we want people to be focused on what they're doing. But at the same time, using handheld devices and digital tools for the equivalent of a YouTube video to teach someone a job or to show them a safety practice or something. So I think, if we put them in the category that I think that they most enable us, it's the tools that they are and that they represent, rather than, and a tool to communicate rather than a means for replacing communication the way we know it. Now, I will say that while I enjoy, and I'm kind of on the cusp, right? Because I still enjoy the conversations around meals and things like that, but there are lots of meals I'd like to just, you can tell whether a couple's dating or they're married, because if they're dating, they're talking. If they're married, they're sitting like this looking at their phones. So they're tools, but they can be crutches, and we just need to, as leaders, sort of, I'll say, navigate that.
Okay, thank you very much. So often, this increased transparency that we've talked about leads to increased scrutiny on leaders, right? So what implications, if any, does this have on your decision-making? Like, do you find yourself in a workforce that wants to know everything about not only their job, but they want to know about their leaders? And a workforce that is very comfortable playing out in public whatever they're experiencing, everything from what they're eating to what they're talking about and what the issues of the day are. So as leaders, have any of you found yourselves in a situation where you've had to think twice or rethink the way you're going to respond to your workforce because of that? We'll start with you, Dal, so you don't have to go.
Yeah, great. That's an easy one. I spent 12 years as an elected official. So that teaches you a lot about shaping your response. And then also, in addressing a multitude of folks in different environments. So I'll give you an example. At the urging of my PAO, I recently started up a half-hour chat with the workforce virtually. So the first 10 minutes, I tell them what I've been up to, and the next 20 minutes, I field questions. So I did the first 10 minutes, charging forward, assisting the fleet in the Red Sea, getting novel direct energy weapons out to the fleet. Any questions? First question was, who are the folks in the pictures behind you on the wall? Right? And so, you can kind of, step back from that and go, wow, that's an interesting one. But, what I find is our workforces want to know us. And it's important, I think, to be vulnerable in that sense and allow your team to understand what drives you, what things are important to you, what your interests are. But then kind of couching that in a way that understanding also that there are a number of folks who will take what you say and run with it one way or another. So I think, you do, I think, have to be super careful with how you utilize the multitude of communication schemes available to us. But the real cool thing is you go from idea or concept or thought to instant transmission in a whole lot of different places. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I appreciate the opportunity to handle it that way.
Okay. Admiral?
I didn't change anything. I don't know that I thought twice about knowing, carrier COs in my past job. You're on the 1MC every day, talking to the ship when you're underway. I knew that people were out there with their cell phones recording it. It is what it is. I don't think it changed the message though, and I don't think it really changed what I said. So I thought about it, but in the end, kind of like we've all mentioned, and you did a nice job just kind of covering it, people just want to know. They want to understand what's happening, where are we going, what are we doing, are things good, are things bad? And the more I think you're open and honest about the communication, the more they they trust you, and you build that trust, and then they believe that the next time you give them the good news or the bad news, that they go, that's really what's happening. And, nobody's searching to go put everything on social media. I think sometimes that happens when they don't trust what you're saying. You haven't given them the truth in the past. And so try to just be open, honest, communicate as frequently as you can in whatever forums you've got. Yeah.
Thank you. Carrie?
So I would say, agree completely, and I think the way that I think about it, so do any of us love being on camera? Do any of us love being on a social media stage or whatever we find is the case? I would say no, and it was certainly for myself, because I'm not that public of a person, but I will say that as leaders, we're holding ourselves accountable regardless. To your point, it doesn't change the message. It doesn't change how we should be behaving. It's just another level of accountability, because a million people can catch you on film, on photo, on whatever, and post it. Now, I will say, though, that the flip side of that is if there is someone that is intent on discrediting, a tiny soundbite taken out of context in anything that anyone in this room or outside of it says can be very, very harmful. And there are a lot of folks that have done that in the past, and we've seen that out in media and other places where you think someone is a solid leader and an unfortunate circumstance. Now, some, absolutely, it's glad that that accountability lens was put on them and some things came out, but I think generally as leaders, we should be holding ourselves to that level of accountability. We're on a stage all of the time. If we think for a second it's about us, we're in the wrong jobs, right? It's about who we represent and how we represent them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that all of the data says that younger generations value transparency and leadership more than previous generations. So to speak to a younger workforce, you have to become good at it. You asked about how you change. I think that for me, my change was recognizing that anything I said could get legs at any moment. And so then you just make it so that everything you say, it doesn't matter if I'm on the stage, if I'm behind the doors having a meeting, it's just the same. Yeah. And then over the course of time, you become pretty good at it. And then by doing it consistently the same way, having the same voice, the same message, one of the things that ends up happening is you end up becoming more authentic as a leader, because people don't see you differently when you're wearing SDBs or when you're doing a social event after our Hail Farewell. The last thing that I would say down that path is that we, a couple of years ago, took a look at commands in the Navy that had measurably greater connectedness. These were commands that, the numbers from the surveys said that they were more connected than others. And so it was interesting. We had 18 commands, 9 that were really good from a connectedness and 9 that were really bad. And so we sent teams to these commands to just kind of meet with them. We didn't tell them beforehand if it was a high or a low connected command. They were 100% accurate in just meeting the people and meeting the leaders. Okay, this is a high connectedness command, this is low. And one of the things that was most interesting about, as they interviewed people and said, hey, what makes your command tick? One of the things was just that honesty when things don't go well. And they said that leaders that they believed in, leaders that created a sense of connectedness, were willing to get up in front of everyone and say, we planned for A, we got B, this is what we learned, and this is how we can get better. I'm not keeping anything from you. The leaders where there wasn't great connectedness were leaders that said, we planned A, and then didn't give feedback to the crew or to the team. And the crew wanted that. Everybody knew a mistake had been made, but the leader was unable to admit it publicly. And that was one of the things that started breaking down their connectedness. So moving from authenticity to honesty, in all accounts, I think builds a team that is more connected.
Okay, so I'd like to follow up with you on that, Admiral Mattis. You work in 17, and there's been a lot of work done in the Navy on culture of excellence and things of that nature. And a lot of things we talked about here in the last few minutes have to do with culture, right? It's like, how do you set that environment where your workforce can trust their leaders and where they're responsive to their leaders and respectful, and the leaders are holding themselves accountable? Can you share your thoughts or any insights on the difficulties or maybe even the simplicity of creating a culture where everybody feels included, welcome, and where they can speak up and be heard?
Yeah, thanks. It's not easy. It's really hard. I think the first step is to really have clear standards for what right looks like. And so if you spend some time after this session and look up Navy's Culture of Excellence 2.0. We spend a lot of time just focused on what right looks like, what makes a great person, grounded in core values, practicing this toughness and resilience mindset, focusing on your mind, body, and spirit wellness, and then having leaders where you define character and competence differently. And one of the big changes that CNO Franchetti made is our previous leadership framework was character, competence, and connections. And the last decision before we launched 2.0 is this decision on should it remain connections or should we change it to culture? And she made the decision to change it to culture, saying that great leaders build great culture and they build great teams. So I think that one of the things I would offer is that it's about having standards, it's about holding yourself and your subordinates to those standards in an inspiring way. And it's about recognizing what I think will be, I'll just offer one more piece of connective tissue and then one way to where it's hard. Piece of connective tissue is oftentimes in my space, which is programs like suicide prevention and response, sexual assault prevention and response. It's all based off of the negative as opposed to the positive. And oftentimes it's focused on what a person should do. And you don't really recognize, and traditionally until recently, policy didn't recognize the interconnection that great people need great leaders to become great teams. When you think about your own journey, when you've changed who you are, sometimes it's because you're sitting alone in a room and you have a deep thought, but oftentimes it's because you've done some work, you've been inspired by a great leader, or you're part of a team that you don't want to let down. The hardest part in this, and we see this consistently, and I'll share a story. I was having the opportunity to speak with a bunch of commanding officers in San Diego, and one of them raised their hand after I was talking about some of these things. And in a very earnest and sincere way, just said, "Hey, how do you handle a hostile leader?" And I kind of looked at him and to make sure we're going to get to the challenge, but it really was one of those things of he had a respected leader on his crew that delivered great outcomes, but was a toxic and bad person. And so how do you retain that outcome and try to help the leader lead in a different way? I shared that story with a 2-star friend of mine last Wednesday, and he started recounting when he had to do that in 05 command, and he said it was one of the toughest conversations he's ever had. Yeah. And so how do you say, like, hey, your heart's in the right place, you may have some own personal resilience that's getting in the way of you treating people well, but here is how we treat people. You're doing great things, but you're treating people like this. Now let's have a conversation about how you can get better, because we want to keep you on the team, but just not doing it the way you're doing it.
I understand. So a lot of times we look at the uniformed community and leadership seems to be, I'll say, more direct. You know, it's like you have your superior officer, you have the people below you. Sometimes in the civilian industry and civilian part of the Navy, it's not so direct. So for Carrie and for Del, I'm sure you've all had, I know I personally had this situation when I was in a leadership position and I said something just in passing, and then it became reality. Okay, we talk about being very natural, right? I'm sure we've all had that conversation. Something as benign as, wow, I wonder why these chairs look like this. And then you come in a week later and you've got all new chairs, right? So people with good intentions, but you know, in the uniformed environment, it's like, okay, that could be taken as a command, you know, but in the civilian, you know, you normally think that that's not, I was just making a comment. So for Carrie and Del, can you guys just share your perspective on, you know, we talked about leaders being accountable and being accountable for what you say, consistency in how you say it. Any insights on how to minimize the impact of those things happening, if they happen at all? So
I'll share a couple quick stories. So I will say that, you know, some of it is generational. So in the civilian side, right? So in the shipyard, we have our folks that have been in the shipyard a minute, right? And we're very commanding. Some of my team is sitting in the front row and he knows who he is. And we think very much alike, right? And so to your point, you say, hey, you know, you make a comment, we should look at that. You know, maybe we should think about that. And then a week later, someone's scheduling something, this big report, there's PowerPoint. Big report that's been generated, you know, a dozen people have spent a tremendous amount of time with excellent intentions and done some great work, but not really to the point. So you have to be careful in that circumstance. But I will say that some of the folks that are coming into the shipyard specifically, we had a big visit last week in the shipyard, and we had a bunch of the younger folks. They were getting ready to go in the conference room that this big group was going to exit from, and they were sitting there all kind of doing the group, all their laptops were out. I'm thinking, this isn't very professional. I'm thinking in my mind, I need to clear this, the VIPs are going to come out of it. And I made the comment to the new folks on the team. I said, hey, we'll find you a conference room. That would be very comfortable. You guys can work, and then we'll let and they're like, oh no, we're good here. I'm like, no, I'm kind of meaning that, so it's different, right? People take in information differently. They take away different things. So I think as leaders, to not have that, you have to be very specific, right? But you have to consider the audience and who you're talking to and how you need to address them and how you need to communicate that. Because if you're too direct in some of those environments, hostile leader, I think is the term, that, right? I mean, people think you're not that great to be around, but others you have to be very direct, because otherwise it doesn't come out the way you intended. So.
Yeah, this is a great topic, and this happened to me either Thursday or Friday. This is how things have changed digitally. This is a recorder from my workforce back at home. So this happened to me Thursday or Friday, and my deputy, who's in the audience, comes to me and says, did you really direct this position? I won't say what it is because it'll get back to the folks what the topic was. I'm like, no, I never even talked about that. Like, well, they're using your name and saying that you did this. So, but I think that the challenge is, right, and we all find ourselves in trying to be problem solvers. And I'm an engineer. I've got some solutions here. Though I recognize that as an SES, you've turned in all expertise in anything a long time ago. To be able to qualify as an SES for sure. But, I think it comes down to asking more questions and pausing. And I find myself that I throw out too many ideas, and those ideas stick as direction way more than I ever intend. Yes. So probably I need to be more deliberate about pausing and maybe asking some questions about how would you handle this, instead of offering all of my plethora of sometimes good ideas that might go forward. Very self-aware, not always best on the self-correction. But certainly I think that's a strategy for us as leaders. But I think we all find ourselves in those situations where there are tons of things going on, right? We're balancing multiple challenges simultaneously. We need to get some of those off in the solve pile, and we forget to employ all the benefits of Get Real, Get Better that Admiral Midas did such a great job of rolling through in his response, and then focus on knocking down the barriers after we've done that analysis and get to that point. But I know I just throw solutions out too fast sometimes, and it leads to that kind of direction. Haven't gotten all new chairs yet. We're going to try that later this week.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to take a pause and let everybody in the audience know that we will have time for questions. So there are microphones in each aisle. So I encourage you, if something comes to mind that you want to ask, just make yourself a note, and you will have an opportunity to ask our panel members any questions that you would like. So we focused a lot on people and taking care of people, making sure that you communicate, you have a clear vision. But another key part of leadership is mission accomplishment, right? So you have to be able to take care of your people while you're doing it. And CNO has made it very clear that the threats to our nation and our interests are real and growing. She said, our adversaries have designed their militaries to overcome our traditional sources of strength. And we must move rapidly to stay ahead and continuously create warfighting advantages. So as the nature of work evolves, how do leaders foster innovation and creativity within their teams? And how does that show up in the military environment? So Dale, we'll start with you. From a government civilian perspective, how do you go about fostering innovation and creativity within your teams, and how does that show up?
Well, thanks, Stephanie. Glad to. As a Naval Surface Warfare Center and part of the Naval Research and Development Establishment, we certainly live in the innovation space. It is our job to make sure that we have unfair advantage in the fight and can deliver that capability to our warfighters. So we take that very seriously. In today's environment, one of the challenges are the demand signal on all of us to deliver. So the first element in delivering on innovation is building in a capacity in your system for innovation. If you're running hard every day, it's really, really difficult to come up with that next great idea. So for us as a largely civilian workforce, we focus on a couple of things. As we hire folks in every year, we start to build that emerging talent base. We're focused on 70% new college grads that come in with the new ideas. We also spend a tremendous amount of effort and energy every year investing in our workforce in graduate education. Again, we're in the intellectual property business, if you will, and serving as the technical conscience for the Department of the Navy. So investing in our people, bringing in the new talent simultaneously to make sure we have that capacity, for innovation for sure. And there's some techniques that we employ. We have what we call our innovation lab, for example, that has really a systems engineer approach to how we get after new problems. And we have a very ungovernment looking space that even has ice cream in the freezer. You know, we could bring folks in, different colors on the wall, and kind of walk through this different process to get after a problem that may have looked different if we were all sitting in offices individually. So I think there's certainly some novel approaches that we employ in environments such as that. It's the formal and educational piece. It is investing in our workforce and again, part of building our succession plan and building emerging leaders, having folks off for external details and key strategic assignments, or even creating them internally. We're doing some of that internally with our workforce now to have them lead at more senior levels and stressing them and challenging them in little ways to think outside the box and locating them outside of the areas that they may have spent the majority of their careers in. So a lot of things wrapped into that response there, but I believe that to be able to innovate, you have to have the capacity first, and then the ability as a system within your organization, and people are willing to think differently than how they've been there before.
Okay, thank you. So Amy, do you see anything different from an operational perspective when it comes to innovation and creativity?
Now, I think if you've ever been on a ship or part of an aircraft where there was a piece of equipment not working, or you had a problem tactically to be solved, your JOs and your young sailors had no problem solving it. And so for me, it's not so much about how do I make them innovate. They will absolutely innovate. For me, it's either trusting them and giving them enough runway to go with it, or make sure that there's a left and right bumper so that the energy is at least funneled in a direction so we don't get too far outside the edges. And so some of the best things we ever did were young sailors and young junior officers solving problems and just letting them run with it. And they will absolutely come up with, and then when you do solve the problem in that moment, what can I do with that idea to make it lasting? Okay, this is probably not the only time we're going to see this challenge with a piece of equipment or with a tactic, technique, or procedure. So how do I make that more formalized so that we don't lose the learning that just happened?
Okay. Now, Brett, you spend a lot of time in the building and on the staff side of things. Do you see a difference there when it comes to innovation and creativity?
Oh yeah, the machine will stifle out innovation the moment you if you avert your eyes for a second, innovation is dead. I think that the system does what the system does, which is produce PowerPoints and decision briefs. But I think there's two things I would offer just as maybe a way to kind of keep innovation alive. Number one is that to have an idea of who your customer is. I talk about this when I get a chance to teach. Oftentimes people view the customer as the admiral or the SES they're trying to make happy. And that's where bad decisions happen. It really is. If you're just trying to make the boss happy, and as a boss, you have to be humble enough to recognize you're not the customer here. But so many times it's like, victory is, did I make the boss happy? Did I get any taskers? And neither of those things have anything to do with innovation, creativity, or any of that element. So I think that's one. And then the second thing is, I think you have to become as a leader just passionately disconnected from the right answer. You want to get to it, but it doesn't have to be yours. And so to be in a room where no matter who is in the room, they can offer an opinion. And if it's a better answer than yours, to just be humble and say, that's an awesome answer. Let's go with that. And what ends up happening, and sometimes it's hard because you'll get a piece of input that you want to respond differently to, but to value every piece of input that you get. Because what ends up happening, I think, and I got one of my team members over there, so this is the point you nod and say, yes, boss, thank you. But it's one of those things, and Lewis knows that in any moment, in any meeting, we'll say, what do you think of this? And whoever has the best idea, that's the one we go with. And so people become more mentally agile because they know that it's not making me happy. They may have the opportunity at any second to be able to provide the right option, the right idea. Hey, I think we should go this way. Yeah, that's the best way, let's go to it. And then people stay more energized in the meetings, and that natural creativity to make things different and better kind of bubbles up a little bit more. So.
Great. Now, Carrie, in the 30 plus years I spent in DOD, we were constantly told that industry is a lot more, and we need to be more like industry, more flexible, more innovative. I would love to hear your perspective on how private industry fosters creativity and innovation. Is it any different than what you've heard here so far?
And we have a saying in the shipyard, or a concept, it's the self-licking ice cream cone. And so while you were hearing we need to be more like
just a word.
industry, we're hearing we need to be more like, so no, I think that, I couldn't have said any of that better than my colleagues. I will say that, when we look at innovation, when we, all of those things that we aspire to do, we don't control it, we contain it, encourage it, allow it to exist, don't become attached to an idea, so that all of the best ideas can come out and the best one can be selected. I think all of that is the right stuff to be doing. But we're human beings, and a lot of times we fail at that. And so I know from an industry perspective, one thing that we've done is we've actually, because we don't have that muscle, we live in a very, in a shipyard, serving the customers that we have the honor to serve. We're in a very regulated environment for a reason. Compliance is a big deal. We want our warfighters to come home. And so until we decide that's not important, we're not looking to push boundaries a whole lot, except for when it comes to cost savings to our customers, things that can be, I'll say standardized, things like that. And so what we've done is we've created a part of the organization that lives alongside of the execute the business, right? Alongside that just starts building that muscle of innovation. They're meant to go out to assume there are no constraints and go look at, for example, right now we're looking at how do you point AI at a shipyard? What does that look like? And don't let anybody tell you that it can't be done. And so I think structurally there are some things we're trying to do for ourselves, in addition to all of the things that the panel has discussed.
Okay. So before I open it up, I have one question for all of you. We talked a lot about driving change and how things around us are changing. So give me one word that's a key attribute you believe modern leaders need to navigate and drive change successfully. If it was one attribute that you think everyone out here, if they want to be an effective leader to drive change successfully, what would that attribute be? Brett.
I was thinking of all the funny words I could say. I'll go with vision.
Vision. Okay.
Want me to say why or just the word?
No, go ahead.
I was just
Tell
say
me why.
it's one of those hard parts is that, a lot of us in the room are engineers or we're not, oftentimes we get bogged into the process, the machine of what we're trying to do. And so to have a clear sense of vision and where you want the organization to go, if you can't cast that vision and then help inspire people to achieve that vision, the change never actually happens. And it's always interesting to watch the number of strategic documents, and they're all great. But then if you were to grade the document, not by how well it reads, but by how much of the stuff in the document actually happened, that'd be a different way to look at them. And so I think you got to have vision.
Okay. Carrie?
I love the word humility. Kind of resonates with what you were
stole
talking
my word.
about. Oh,
I'm
together
sorry.
we love humility.
Together.
I've never heard of that word.
Humility.
I think
you have.
Yeah, right. No, I think that
with confidence.
I am never going to be the smartest person in the room discussing every topic. Neither is anyone else on the team or anybody else in the room. And I think if you have the humility to listen to the ideas around you, to your point, you're going to get the best ideas. And the only way you get change to actually take hold and move an organization forward or a team or whatever is if everybody agrees that it can be done. And so to do that, you have to have other ideas. Otherwise, it just becomes command and control. You're following direction, and that's a very different place to live.
I understand. Amy?
Okay, because I'm not going to use the exact same word, but along the same lines, not exactly one word, but the ability to take feedback
Okay.
and be able to, I think one of the best compliments I had in one job was not long into the job, one of the other, kind of the central group of people that I was leading was able to come to me and say, hey, I think we were a little off base here. And the first time you jump at somebody, when they do that, you're never going to get feedback again. And then no one's going to tell you what's really going on. And so sort of in the humility vein, but a little bit different, is just being able to take that feedback to be able to become a better organization.
Thank you. Del?
I think it's energy for me, and as I've been through a number of changes over the years, and not just the energy that the leader imparts or evokes within the organization, but it's generating energy around that change within the team. And for example, we're experimenting some things with our mission and vision and where we're going, not sort of the mission of deterring and defeating our adversaries and being ready to do so each and every day. but we've launched some things that are pretty aggressive. So our new mission statement is no peers, no fear. And that doesn't necessarily mean that as a warfare center there aren't any peers to us by any stretch. But we want our warfighters to have no peers in the fight, and the ability to go in with an unapologetic advantage. And so I think anytime that you want to do something like that, generating that energy around it is so important, because I find that our system, that PowerPoint-based system that Admiral Midas was talking about, it tends to want to snap back. And so you have to be able to drive through those snapbacks to the point of success. And once you can break the bands that hold you back, then the change can start to take hold. And and there's a lot of relationship building that goes into that, a lot of communication and listening and all too. But for me, that's what I try to bring to the table.
If I could, it was one of the most helpful things that I heard. I was listening to a company talk about how to find the right attributes for their executives. And what they settled on was what you said: bring positive energy. And and you think about that when you get out of a meeting with somebody, do you think, I never want to see them again? Do you think that felt pretty good? I'm anxious, and so you can just imagine, and the analogy I use to help with that, if it's helpful, I was a graduate assistant football coach when I was an ensign, and we used to spend just so much time looking at every single play to be able to who was doing what on the offensive line. And you can imagine what it would look like. Just imagine your last staff meeting or your last fill-in-the-blank meeting, if at the end of it, the leader stood up and said, all right, everybody go get some water, we're going to come back in and watch the game film. And then you watched the meeting happen. Like, what would that look like? And or would you be proud of it as a leader? Did you bring positive energy? Did you show humility? So it's just kind of a different way to think about it.
I think we're going to try that.
I was going to say, I like that. I encourage all the leaders in the audience, watch the game film from your last meeting and give yourself a grade. So I'd like to take a pause to see if we have any questions from the audience as we get, okay.
And this is kind of for everyone here. For the emerging leaders, what book would you recommend to read on leadership?
It came out about 15 months ago, so some of you have probably already read it, but To Rule the Waves. If you want to know why United States Navy should exist, it's about 300 pages. And so I don't know how many of my sailors I'm going to be able to get to dive in, but it's a phenomenal book, and it really authors Bruce Jones. He goes into everything about why container ships are the size they are and why containers are the size they are, to how certain ports came to be successful ports, to why the U.S. Navy should be doing the mission that it's doing. So that's mine. Or Legacy, leadership book called Legacy, written about the All Blacks from New Zealand, the rugby team. Just phenomenal book. It seemed to take all of the best little leadership nuggets from a bunch of different books and put it into one. So those are my two.
Okay. Anybody else have a favorite?
My go-to, and it's probably one of the ones that shaped me the most as a young leader, is John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And that one is just especially when I was younger in command and major command, I would just break that one out and just go chapter by chapter and ask how I was doing and use it as a way to just kind of litmus test me. And then more recently, there's a bunch of books now that are really getting into the neuroscience, like From the Leader's Brain. The one that I'm reading now is called Happiness Hypothesis, and it goes into how your brain works and then just some of the timeless truths about what makes a person tick. And so I think, like I said before, understanding kind of where neuroscience is proving how we respond, understanding that and being able to bring it to bear as a leader is really important. So thanks.
Yeah, I can second on the Maxwell. I still have that one on my bookshelf. I'll pull it out often. All right, we have another question.
Good afternoon. So I represent a technology-based training firm, and I appreciate the fact that RRL was brought up because our company has a piece of that. You mentioned training, and so I have an observation, and I would like to have your feedback on it. So as someone who recently retired from the military, we've done a lot of training. We build a lot of training and curriculum development for Navy systems. However, when we see the contracts come out, as an industry member, it seems like the training piece is always on the back end. It's sometimes an afterthought, where the end item tends to be the focus. So how do we get to the point where our training matches the sophistication as the end item, with micro-learning, with interactive training, getting away from the PowerPoints that still dominate kind of the training spectrum? Thank you.
let you go first.
I was going to let you go first, Mr.
Okay.
Nine.
And I'll go first.
Okay.
Somebody else want to go first? I just think you have to reject the model. I mean, I think that fundamentally we've all been trained a different way. You develop learning objectives. You give an instructor a binder that's this thick of all the things they're supposed to hit. And somehow we don't have that for our iPhones, our TVs, our cars, and other things. And so I think that I think we just have to break through that model and reject it when you get a chance. And it's easy to think about requirements and technical specifications, and you must train to this. But again, but if I go back to what I said earlier, it's who's the customer for the training. If the customer is the person you're paying to develop the training or the leader you're trying to make happy, that's different than giving it to someone, understanding how the human brain works, and then asking them, does this work? We just got a bunch of money in. I own a lot of hard programs, as I mentioned earlier, and we're redoing suicide prevention training. And one of the things that we want to do consistently in terms of getting feedback before we launch it on the fleet is actually do focus groups with this. Was this good training? Did you like this? Did it make the mark that we were hoping it would? And not just deploy, know that we met every requirement, we spent every dollar, and for some reason claim that as victory.
Thank you. Does anybody have something?
I would add that in our world and technology development, so we develop trainers, combat system training systems for sure. There's a technology element of that. There's a human factors element of that. It's getting the right environment for the student base. But I wanted to kind of shift to the civilian STEM kind of folks and our scientists and engineers, and it's really an experiential learning. There's still no replacement for having folks who truly know what they're doing. And the opportunity to work one-on-one, investing and pouring into people to help them through that interaction and the transmission of that knowledge, if you will. Again, for broad scale, the word training, certainly I think we need to continue to advance in how we leverage technology in delivering systems. But at the end of the day, I think you still have to have that expert, the person who's been there, done that experiential learning to really serve as an experience accelerator for our workforce.
Thank you. We have another question.
Hello, thank you all for the panel. I was wondering, how do you motivate your journeymen and middle managers to motivate the next generation? Because I find that sometimes it's really passionate at the top, but it's harder to get the middle level motivated in the mentoring role.
That frozen middle we've all heard about.
So Gallup would agree with you too, and so would probably all of our Gallup surveys we've ever done. I mean, it kind of breaks down in the middle. You can touch a certain number of folks every day, and so if you're in senior leadership, you're super connected to mission purpose. I have the privilege and some of my team to come to forums like this where we get to see the people that are using the products and understand and get that feedback and hear about the threats in a very real and tangible way. We don't sleep very well when we leave, all right, but better knowing everybody in this room and at this conference is working on that big problem. I think that, so we touch the people that we touch, but then, it's the game of operator or telephone or whatever you call it, right? So the comms piece of it is incredibly important, and we've been spending a lot of time on that, is how do we communicate through? Because we know that given the choice to do your everyday job or communicate a tough message or a compelling message, not everybody is a born communicator. And so putting those in tool sets and with language and with the visuals and things that go with that to communicate that mission and purpose for us. We've got a battle cry at the shipyard trying to connect people, but it's still that challenge, right? Because they're focused on what they do every single day, the tactical, aspects of getting progress and performing on contracts and things like that. And so we honestly, candidly, we've not cracked that yet, right? We are implying more tools, more, concepts, more ways to do that than we ever have. Our communications department, just to stay with the communications thread for a minute, used to effectively be a press room. We put out press releases, we would announce, hiring events or, whatever, and that was it. But now we're on social, we're out in media, we're everywhere. And the team just does a phenomenal job with that. And it's still not enough because even though we do internal comms, we have something called culture connectors and our engagement champions, and we're trying to get those messages out and let people know how important they are to connect them to mission, because that's when it really starts. People ask questions, they get engaged, they want to understand why we're doing things rather than just taking a step back and just riding the machine. So over to you guys.
Yeah, I think it starts with recruiting and hiring that early. So I spend a lot of time personally in our recruiting and hiring initiatives, attend job fairs at colleges and universities, and I always ask the students, hey, go to these other booths and ask them if their CEO is there. If they're not, then you need to come back and talk. But truly, we want to find folks who want to be in our space. There are, believe it or not, folks who don't believe in building high energy weapon systems or the ability to create death and destruction on another end when we need to do so. Right, and so there's a lot of folks who may not sync up with that mission. So you have to get the right folks and then give them the opportunity to apply their trade. If you get that part wrong, we're a hands-on RDT in the institution. We stick by that. We advertise that. We talk that up. If we don't deliver on that, we'll fail at that piece of having our entry-level, more junior workforce engaged there. And then secondly, it's building, or maybe thirdly, lost track of my points. It's building a community amongst those folks, right? So that they know that they're in the fight together. They can grow together. They advance their education together, and then they go deliver product to our warfighters that matter together.
And I'll just add, a lot of times we think about our middle management as the way to get down to the lower part, right? It's like you want them motivated. Sometimes as leader, I've experienced that I had to work around them. And I know we don't like to think about that a lot, but that has been my reality. And find out where the other influencers are in the organization. We have our formal hierarchy within a given organization, senior, middle, and then lower management. But there are a lot of people in your organization that carry a lot more influence than you may know about. And when you're trying to bring about change or motivation, tapping into those people can be very effective as well. We have a question over here.
Hi, thank you guys for being here. My question is, what advice would you give to leaders, especially young leaders who are trying to lead a team with people who are resistant to change?
You're the youngest.
Sorry.
Don't shy away.
I think that as a guy that stayed in the Navy, because I don't find a lot of natural change agents, I've always kind of enjoyed it. But it also reminds me that there's not a lot of people that really get excited about change. I hate to say it, but I mean, it's predictable as heck. When I was I've known what I was going to wear to work every day for the last 17, since I was 17. And so the government oftentimes by its nature doesn't invite people that are excited about change. And so I think you have to acknowledge that. And when you get in a room and get everybody excited, like, we're going to go change. And there's a lot of people that are like, nah, does that mean I'm going to have to leave work late tonight? Because I'm not that excited about it. So I think recognizing that is the case and just being honest with yourself that despite however compelling I think I might be in a speech or a presentation, it may take a lot of deep work to get folks on board and to work with them. And I find that if you can find a way to resonate in someone's soul with the why, then they might want to do it. And if not, then they'll just resist, especially in the military world, because I've been in my job for 2 years. Everybody there from day one that I got there knew I was leaving in 2 years. And so how do you handle that and lead change and vision? You do it through personal investment and those types of things. But yeah, it's okay. You should expect people to not want to get on board. You just got to work with them.
And it's human nature. Don't take it personally, to your point. I mean, everyone resists change. It's not comfortable unless you're the change agent. It's something you want to see happen. So I think, the first thought that I had when the question was asked is just be relentless. You have to know you're going to put everything into it. And if you're committed to it and it's important to you and you know it's the right thing to do, then you'll find a way to be compelling. And to your point, to move the needle with those that are not as immediately on board with the ideas. There are always going to be people that don't want to change, period. And accepting that and getting the majority at least on board, the sort of the critical mass to move forward. But it takes a minute, to your point. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of commitment.
Anybody else?
If I could build on that, 2 quick points. Be willing to change the players. Your players may not be open to change. That happens. Secondly, be willing to hear out the organization, the change that you're trying to make. You may be driving a square peg into a round hole and reevaluate that particular change. So not just saying that's just either of those are the starting points, just to build on the rest of the dialogue.
If I could, one quick thing too, because it just came to mind. We've done a massive change in the people and culture space in the Navy. Again, download Culture of Excellence 2.0. You'll see it. One of the things that I did, and I got some feedback this week from one of my leaders, is that just be really deliberate. Just because you're excited about the change doesn't mean everybody is. And is it better to lean forward with the change now, knowing that you have 5% of your team on board, or to lean forward in the change 6 months from now when you have 80% of your team on board? I think a lot of times when you're inspired to change, you want to do it now because you feel the raw passion and energy of the moment, but it might be better to wait a little bit. And like on our change, we took about 18 months to get the change right. And by that point, just about everybody was on board, at least publicly, and it put us in a better spot.
And there was a little piece, and then we got one more question, and we have to wrap up, I think. But I think your comment about, especially when you're the younger person, so have any of you been in a situation where you've taken, or been in a situation where you've worked for or had to take guidance from someone who was younger than you? And was there anything in how they handled that got you on board? Because I think that's a big, I'm seeing more and more of that, where you have younger leaders leading a more mature or seasoned workforce. Any thoughts from anybody on that?
I used to be one of those, but
You used to be
not
one of those
anymore.
people?
I would say control what you can control. And I think if you control what you can control, which is probably more than you think, and you just know your job and do your job to the best of your ability, oftentimes you can have more influence than you think. And so control what you can control, keep working hard, and you'll probably get in a direction that you'll accomplish more than you thought you could.
Thank you. Okay, our last question.
So I am a middle manager in the civilian world, and my question is, how do we get our top leaders, those above us, not just those below us, but those above us, to be more transparent, to be more like the leaders you all are talking about? How do we correctly encourage that?
Control what you can control. In all honesty, if you're more transparent, good things will probably come, and hopefully they are, receptive, and your senior leaders will see it, and hopefully internalize that. But you can only control what you can control. So you try to be that person for them, for the people that you're leading.
What I would add too, everyone in any organization is focused on the role that they play, right? And everyone has a role to play. And so there may be blind spots that, that feedback is a gift, we say, right? And if you treat it that way and make sure that everyone knows you're open to it. So sometimes leaders, we've all had leaders that you would like to have given feedback, but maybe didn't feel comfortable. And you have others that maybe you felt comfortable, but you weren't sure and you didn't, and nothing changes. So control what you can control, but then, if the person or the group of leaders is open to feedback, then I think that's an important part of the conversation. And I would think, if they're leaders in your organization, they would be there for a reason, and so they're probably open to that feedback.
One of the things that I've implemented is a shadowing program, and I was hoping out of the 5,000, at least a couple would want to do it. But actually, we have a backlog of folks who have signed up, and so we start out at 7 in the morning or so, and kind of do a hot wash or a pre-brief on the day, and then we'll get back together at the end of the day and do a hot wash on all the activities. And one of the responsibilities that I ask each of those folks to do is to critique me on the actions throughout that day. I'll provide feedback as well, but I want that feedback returned to me. The vast majority of folks who are signing up for those shadowing assignments are folks in our middle management team, if you will. But it's everyone from interns to executives. But the middle managers have been the vast majority, and it's been outstanding for me personally.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, 'cause
I was just going to say that if you have a climate assessment process, I know a lot of Navy organizations do, participate in that in the most helpful way you can by providing great substantive feedback. And then the other thing I would say is a lot of times when we look up at our leaders, we think they have it all together, and we think that and most of the time, I know for me, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, days are hard. And a lot of times when you don't have time for transparency or those things, it's just because of the stress and the things that are happening. And so I think patience and kind of pulling it out of the leader and being transparent when you get the chance. And part of the human, the way that we respond, humans are natural mimickers. And it's just what we do. And so if you're able to have a conversation with a leader and you can thoughtfully become more transparent, their brain is actually wired to become more transparent in that moment. And you might be able to create some wins there that are helpful for you and your team.
That's a great thought.
Well, it has been a fast hour. Our time has ended. I'd like to thank our panel and just leave you guys with a couple of things that I took away from all the great information they shared today. Just make a note mentally or in your phone or on a piece of paper about those attributes. We talked about vision, humility, being willing and able to take feedback, and being able to create energy and to control what you control. And the last couple things that Admiral Midas made me think about was to be able to give and receive a little patience and a little grace. And I think that we as leaders and our organizations will benefit from that. So thank you all very much. Please join me in thanking our panel for an outstanding session. Are you guys available if anybody wants to? Okay, and if anybody has any other questions that you didn't feel comfortable stepping up, we will be available for you. Thank you very much.